Colin Powell was the U.S. Secretary of State on 9/11. That made him President Bush's point man on the world stage. He made the case for war with Iraq at the United Nations. On behalf of the administration, Powell claimed Saddam Hussein was trying to buy raw material from Africa to build nuclear weapons, and he gave an elaborate description of an Iraqi weapons program that, as it turned out, never existed.
Ambition and hatred are enough to bring Iraq and al-Qaeda together, enough so al-Qaeda could learn how to build more sophisticated bombs and learn how to forge documents, and enough so that al-Qaeda could turn to Iraq for help in acquiring expertise on weapons of mass destruction.
You have to remember, it came from a national intelligence estimate, agreed to by the intelligence community. There may have been one or two dissents, and when there was a dissent, I included that. The aluminum tubes, thought they were for centrifuges, but I noted in my presentation there are other points of view about that.
And so within the State Department, within your intelligence services in the State Department?
Within our intelligence services, the Department of Energy had a different view. My guys were not sure, but it was determined by the Director of Central Intelligence and his deputy and his others that no, we're pretty sure this is what it's for.
John McLaughlin, George Tenet.
Right, but even then I qualified that because there were differences of opinion about it. But you know, you essentially get the information and you accept it or you don't accept it. The Congress had accepted it. The intelligence committees that called for the National Intelligence Estimate accepted it. And many of the people who subsequently were critical of it were those who voted on the basis of that intelligence estimate.
So as we reflect
do I regret it? Of course I do. Yeah.
You do regret it?
Of course.
Iraq declared 8,500 liters of anthrax, but UNSCOM estimates that Saddam Hussein could have produced 25,000 liters. If concentrated into this dry form, this amount would be enough to fill tens upon tens of thousands of teaspoons, and Saddam Hussein has not verifiably accounted for even 1 teaspoonful of this deadly material.
But it turned out, as we discovered later, that a lot of the sourcing that had been attested to by the intelligence community was wrong. Imagine how I felt the day that they finally came in and said to me, well, you know, we don't have 4 independent sources for that biological warfare van. It's one guy, and he's loopy, and he's in a German jail, and we've never talked to him. Hello? And I'm sitting there.
Well, how did you feel?
I felt terrible. And 6 months later, the intelligence community is still standing behind their original judgments, even though nothing has been found.
Every statement I make today is backed up by sources, solid sources. These are not assertions. What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence.
If we had known the intelligence was wrong, we would not have gone into Iraq. But the intelligence community, all 16 agencies, assured us that it was right. My speech at the UN was based on that information. But guess what? 376 members of Congress, if I have my number correctly, voted on the basis of that intelligence that it was something the president can do.
By and large, the entire American news media swallowed that fish. They were like seals in a zoo, and Powell was dropping fish in their mouth, and they almost without exception, and I made a list, I don't have it in front of me, but a list of all of the leading newspapers, all of the leading news networks didn't question that presentation.
The media monitoring group Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, or FAIR, studied 1,617 on-camera sources between March 20th and April 9th, 2003. They found 71% of all sources were pro-war, only 3% anti-war.
And on PBS, just 2 months after 9/11, Frontline and the New York Times teamed up for a documentary on the defectors.
Captain Saba Kodada is a former Army officer who defected from Iraq. He made a crude drawing of what he says is a terrorist training camp on the outskirts of Baghdad. known
There
as
were
Sodom.
caveats.
Once it begins to look as though he is relinquishing his grip on power, I think he's toast.
The choice is disarming him by war or letting him have these weapons of mass destruction.
Proof that Russia is to blame for the hacks during our election.
That Russia intentionally interfered with the U.S. presidential election.
A former top Iraqi nuclear scientist tells Congress Iraq could build 3 nuclear bombs by 2005.
Well, now another defector, a senior Iraqi intelligence official, tells Vanity Fair in an exclusive interview that Saddam Hussein has trained an elite fighting force in sabotage, urban warfare, hijacking, and murder. David Rose wrote the story. He joins us now from London.
All 17 U.S. national intelligence agencies, all of them in lockstep, that the Russian government did intervene in the U.S. presidential election.
Classified evidence that Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered a hacking campaign to influence the election in his favor.
We would be seen as liberators in Iraq.
Major newspapers and magazines gave them prime space to make their case, including the possibility that 9/11 had been sponsored, supported, and perhaps even ordered by Saddam Hussein. The president, they said, should take preemptive action.
Post yesterday, quote, the Russian government hackers penetrated the computer network of the Democratic National Committee. The intruders so thoroughly compromised the DNC system that they were able to read all email and chat traffic.
I think that the Baghdad regime is a serious danger to world peace.
Weapons of mass destruction in the hands of Saddam Hussein, plus his known contact with terrorists, including al-Qaeda terrorists, is simply a threat too large to continue to tolerate.
And instead of uniting against a common enemy, in this case, Putin and Russia, and that Russia not only was doing it in order just to be mischievous, they were doing it to get an outcome. Does the fact that they got the outcome they wanted mean that they got away with it? It's hard to believe.
What are the consequences if the U.S. does not finish off this Saddam Hussein as a second step in the war on terrorism?
It would mean that the president, having declared a global war on terrorism, didn't follow through, didn't take out the most threatening terrorist state in the world.
Sapphire, will you wager, Ms. right now that Saddam will be out of power by the end of 2002?
Absolutely. I'll see you here a year from now.
Is there a difference between espionage and interfering in an election?
Yes, espionage implies to me at least, a passive.
Yeah, okay.
Passive collection, and this was much more activist.
So when it comes to espionage, we better be careful about throwing rocks. When it comes to interfering in our election, we better be ready to throw rocks. Do you agree with that?
That's a good metaphor.
You say you think this was approved at the highest level of government in Russia, generally speaking. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what we said.
Okay, who's the highest level of government?
Well, the highest is President Putin.
Do you think a lot happens in Russia big that he doesn't know about?
Not very many.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Certainly none that are politically sensitive in another country.
Okay.
The statement that was issued by the intelligence community in October of 2016, before the election, making clear that Russia was interfering in our election, represented the consensus view of 17 different intelligence agencies. That's not usually the way intelligence works. That kind of unanimity of opinion, particularly when the stakes are so high, is notable. The decision by the intelligence community, not just to reach that conclusion, but to make it public, is notable. And I think it reflects the depth of their confidence in that assessment.
We had known the intelligence was wrong. We would not have gone into Iraq. But the intelligence community, all 16 agencies, assured us that it was right.
Only later, much later, did we learn that this information came from Sheikh al-Libi, who was waterboarded, probably in Cairo, with no U.S. personnel present. We also learned that within days of his having given this information under torture, he recanted. We learned also that the Defense Intelligence Agency, having seen that recantation and having seen other data about how the information was obtained in the first place, had issued a burn notice on it. That is to say, this is worthless. Don't pay any attention to it. Later, George Tenet would say that due to a computer glitch, that burn notice, that DIA statement not to trust al-Libi, never was revealed to the Secretary.
I cannot tell you why within the intelligence community, the people who had put out burn notices, meaning don't trust this source, those burn notices never rose to the right level. And one of the things I'm most irate about is that I have reason to believe in the CIA, the nights we were out there till midnight every night, putting this presentation together and trying to make it airtight, there were people in the room who knew that burn notices had gone out on some of these sources, and that was not raised to me or to Mr. Tenet.
Why not?
I can't answer that question. This is for the others. You know, I'm not the investigator of the intelligence community, but if I was, we would be having very long meetings about this.
But I think it's an indication that the intelligence community is following more than their gut instinct.
So I said, well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to al-Qaeda? He said, no. He says, there's nothing new that way. They've just made the decision to go to war with Iraq. He said, I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments. And he said, I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail. So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
I want to go after those things that Assad sees as his personal power base, right? I want to scare Assad. So I want to go after his presidential guard. I want to bomb his offices in the middle of the night.
Well, that happened about 2 years ago, as you remember, when his brother-in-law was...
I want to destroy his presidential aircraft on the ground. I want to destroy his presidential helicopters. I want to make him think we're coming after him, right? I'm not advocating assassinating him. I am not advocating that. I'm advocating going after what he thinks is his power base, right, and what he needs to survive. I want him to think about, this is not going to end well for me, right? I want to put pressure on him. I want to put pressure on the Iranians. I want to put pressure on the Russians to come to that diplomatic settlement. I'd give them the things that they need to both go after the Assad government, but also to have the Iranians and the Russians pay a little price, right? When we were in Iraq, the Iranians were giving weapons to the Shia militia who were killing American soldiers, right? The Iranians were making us pay a price. We need to make the Iranians pay a price in Syria. We need to make the Russians pay a price. The other thing I would do...
We make them pay the price by killing Russians?
Yes.
And killing Iranians?
Yes. Covertly. So you don't tell the world about it, right? You don't stand up at the Pentagon and say, we did this, right? But you make sure they know it in Moscow and Tehran. Here's the other thing I want to do.
Glenn Greenwald, the Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter who broke the NSA surveillance story, says many people are making an old mistake, and he warns, quote, anonymous claims leaked to newspapers about what the CIA believes do not constitute proof, and certainly do not constitute reliable evidence that substitutes for actual evidence that can be reviewed. Have we really not learned this lesson yet?
I'm ready to throw a rock. Would I be justified as a United States Senator taking your information about Russia's involvement in our election and what they're doing throughout the world and be more aggressive than President Obama if I chose to?
That's your choice, Senator.
Do you think he was justified in imposing new sanctions based on what Russia did?
I do.
Okay. So to those of you who want to throw rocks, you're going to get a chance here soon. And if we don't throw rocks, we're going to make a huge mistake. Admiral Rogers, is this going to stop until we make the cost higher?
We have got to change the dynamic here because we're on the wrong end of the cost equation.
Yeah, you got that right.
Spectrum that investigators, lawyers, and intelligence officials all use. And on that spectrum, the argument here is that the public accounting of the emails is known, that there was a lead-up of intelligence about Russia doing this, then it was done, and then since that time there's been a wide variety of, yes, anonymous sources, but in different outlets saying that this was Russia and it had certain political goals. Would you say, though, all of that adds up to circumstantially strong evidence as a general matter?
No. What circumstantial evidence can you point to, Ari? You just identified what agents have claimed, what agencies have claimed, agencies that have a long history of error, that are designed to disseminate disinformation, that are subject to groupthink, that are political actors who have constantly disseminated claims that turned out to be false for whatever their motives might be. You have taken all of those agencies and you just described in your question to me what they claim. What evidence is there, definitive, circumstantial, or otherwise, that they have presented that suggests that the Russian government is behind these leaks? There is none. What is the evidence?
Right. No, I mean, I'm asking you the question. I think the background is...
Now, the intelligence community, 7 months after the fall of Baghdad, was still saying that they were confident of the judgments they had made that were in my speech, even though nothing had been found. And so the belief was there, and we all believed that weapons of mass destruction were there, but they weren't.